Those are the headlines. It's back to Jane.
Thank you very much for that. Shahan, the clock is ticking before submissions for the new tobacco bill close. Have all the checks and balances been done on the control of tobacco products and electronic delivery system bill as it stands? With me to discuss this, Japan Tobacco Industries General Manager and Vice President of JTI, Southern, Eastern and Central Africa, Andrew Newman. Lynn Moore-Weng Mshlangu, Chief Director for Health Promotion, Nutrition, Oral Health and Food Control. Zodwa Veleman, CEO of the Vapor Products Association, and Severa Keladine, Executive Director for the National Council Against Smoking. A very good evening to all of you. Let me start off with you. Staggering, isn't it, when you hear how many people are dying across the world every single day? What is the situation in South Africa?
In fact, let me start by saying tobacco. Over the years, we have been able to reduce smokers, and that went down simultaneously with the reduction in cancers, which are related to smoking. So in around the 80s, we had about 33% of people who were smoking. That went down to about 18%, partly because of the regulations and also with the reduction in, as I say, with lung cancers.
And sorry, is that due to advertising and the fact that you separated smokers from
non-smokers? It's regulations, it's multiple factors that led to that reduction. But we are again seeing a slight increase in tobacco smoking. So we really feel that we need to tighten even the areas that were left loose. The FCT is giving us various areas that we need to be regulating. And as a country, we have not regulated all the areas. So now we have tried to, the bill is actually trying to create an environment where we can regulate. It's not necessarily a regulation on its own, but the areas that we have included in the bill over the years, we were not able to regulate because our act did not allow for that. So given the improved or the updated act, which tightens certain areas, we will now be able to develop specific regulations that talk to the various issues to try and improve or reduce the smoking prevalence in the country.
Okay, Mr. Newman, the WHO says the tobacco epidemic is one of the biggest public health threats the world has ever faced. So clearly it is time now, isn't it, finally, to tackle it and tackle it smartly.
And actually, surprisingly, given that I work for a tobacco manufacturer, I'm going to agree that tobacco presents a serious risk to health, and frankly, that debate's done. What's at issue, I think, when we're talking about South Africa in particular, though, is the increasing rate of smoking, and the fact that, unfortunately, the country has not effectively been able to continue, this decline of the smoking rates. What's at issue, though, is not the focus. What's driving the growth in smoking currently is the price. It's one of the cheapest markets in the world for tobacco currently. What's driving that is 1 in 3 cigarettes being sold in South Africa are illicit. The tax is not being applied. That's, frankly, something that can be changed today through simple tightening of the existing enforcement of existing regulations. You could raise the price immediately. Once the prices go up, we know, and this is, again, beyond debate, that increasing prices will reduce the consumption. It's within the power of government to act immediately. Where we're confused, and I'll be completely honest, confused with the proposed regulations, is that South Africa is proposing enacting a number of very aggressive and extreme regulations when they haven't tackled the basics of regulating the industry in the first place. So what we're really proposing is not that there shouldn't be any new legislation, but that the government needs to step back, speak to all stakeholders, and come up with a simple and effective move towards reducing the smoking rate before doing very advanced things like plain packaging.
Looks like you want to jump
Yes.
in there. I mean, do you think that's true, firstly, that the basics haven't been tackled yet, so we're jumping ahead of the gun here?
Absolutely not. I disagree entirely. We needed the initial legislation that we had, and as we heard from the Department of Health, that we saw a significant drop in consumption. However, there's been either stagnation or a slight increase over the last decade, and we need to drop our prevalence. We need fewer people to smoke, and we need them to smoke less. And the way for us to do that is to adopt this draft bill as law, because they are evidence-based strategies to make sure that, to make it easier for people to make the healthy choice, which is not to smoke. Alongside that, we have a huge problem with the illicit trade. It has been almost a decade-long problem, and the National Prosecuting Authority, the criminal justice system, have been informed by pre-2014 SARS of the 12 billion in unpaid taxes by the 15 tobacco manufacturers and importers who have been involved in tax evasion and who have been involved in the illicit trade. That work needs to happen at the same time as health promoting policies need to be put in
I was going to
place.
say, because if this bill comes into force, surely the illicit trade will flourish even more. I mean, how would you monitor it then?
Well, the public health side of work cannot be put on hold because the criminal justice system is not doing its work. We have had the illicit trade for the last almost decade, and we haven't had this new legislation. So this legislation is not going to accelerate that. That was a pre-existing problem. So that must be dealt with by the state, by the agencies of the state, and we must do our work, which is protect public health through good legislation that is evidence-based.
So a holistic approach is obviously needed.
Yes, and I am Zodwa. If I can also jump in, we had an opportunity to also study the legislation as proposed by the Department of Health. And yesterday we were able to submit our comments to the department. And what is important and coming out from our submission is that, firstly, we do think that, I mean, I'm not going to speak for the tobacco industry, but as vaping, we have seen that there has been some scientific evidence that has actually proven that the vaping industry is giving those that want to quit smoking an opportunity to do just that through using the vaping products. And there is science behind that, because we've also seen that in some markets like the US and the UK, and the UK being one of those markets that is actually now supporting the vaping industry as an alternative for people that want to switch from tobacco to vaping, they're actually saying that they've been able to see the numbers of people that smoke the tobacco cigarette plummeting.
Okay, now I've heard the opposite. I've heard that actually vaping encourages people to smoke if they haven't smoked before, that there are incredible health dangers linked to vaping that we haven't even properly explored yet. Nobody really knows the impact of vaping. I mean, how bad is it?
So maybe if I can just come in there again before I hand over to you, ma'am, is that indeed what we have actually said is that we are not talking to people that are younger than the age of 18, so that still applies as actually adults. But over and above that, what is important is that we've recently done a research conducted by Kentberg Consultancy, and what they've actually shown is that the vaping products is actually not a gateway for smoking. Actually, this is also contained globally. It says that about 0.02% of the people that do vape are the new ones, but for the rest, it's people that have been smoking for years and they're trying to find an alternative.
I mean, you hear
so in our submission,
submission,
what we've actually done is we have collated all the research that is available globally to date, available on the subject. We've combined the entire research and we've actually submitted it with our comments to the legislation, because we actually
this seems to fly in the face
want
from
the legislation.
Go ahead.
However, let us make sure that it's scientifically based, and we've actually tried to provide that.
So the evidence against the use of e-cigarettes and their link to health harm is growing on a daily basis. But what I'll just give you a couple of people who have said that it needs to be regulated because of the health harm. One is the US Surgeon General, way back in 2016, especially because of the impact on young people, because it is a gateway to tobacco smoking, but also because it affects the adolescent brain, which is still growing. So it has an impact on that brain about addiction, in relation to addiction, and also in relation to other kinds of addictive behaviors. We also have the World Health Organization, again, way back in 2016, saying that it needs to be regulated because of the health harm, not just to the user, but to the to non-smokers around the user as well. We've had also one of the global experts in tobacco control, the University of California, doing a meta-analysis study of all the studies done around e-cigarette harm to say that we've got the link between lung disease, heart disease, the impact on cot death syndrome, etc. And when e-cigarettes were introduced here, they still are registered as a Schedule 3 drug, so they should have only been available under prescription, and if they were going to be used as a tool to give up smoking. So what the e-cigarette industry saw was that because it doesn't have any tobacco in it, it didn't fall under our Tobacco Controls Act. So they used the gap to open all these e-cigarette outlets and say it's not a tobacco product, it doesn't fall under our existing law. Now that it's going to be regulated, they're saying, oh no, we're using it as a quit tool. Then why do we have stores selling it and not pharmacies?
Let's leave it on that question. It seems to be just another crutch, doesn't it? We'll be back with our panel. You're watching Tonight with Jane Dutton.
To help make sure you have enough money for life's journey, Momentum has a plan.
By being safe on the road and everywhere else, you could get up to 30% of your car and home insurance premiums back in cash every year, even if you claim.
And as part of the bigger plan, you get to multiply your benefits. Speak to your financial advisor or SMS cash to 42024 for a quote.
Coming up on this week's Mags on Media, how a beer brand won the Digital World Cup, how Gauteng's biggest radio station hits the jackpot with its latest content offering, and taking the music video market into an entirely new paradigm. Mags on Media, leading the communications debate only on ENCA.
This is Tonight with Jane Dutton. Public submissions for the new tobacco bill close at midnight. We are back with my panel to discuss it, so you can have your point as far as the bill is concerned, and you can give us a call to ask my panel any questions. And I believe we've got somebody on the line now, George from Boksburg. Go ahead, George.
Good evening to all.
Good evening.
A quick question or quick comment. Why do they not concentrate on the alcohol business? It kills and harms far more people than tobacco does. That's it.
Okay, it's a good question, isn't it? And I think that's another whole show, isn't it? I mean, maybe there's more money in it. I don't know, who knows? Okay, let's talk a little bit about the economy behind cigarettes. And we've got a nice soundbite dealing with the economy and raising some of the questions about the economy, which doesn't seem to have popped up. So let me ask you, how do you balance working with governments? I mean, I know the Japanese government has got a stake in one of the tobacco companies. How do you balance that with health concerns?
Well, it's not that's far from easy. I think the issue here is balancing, benefits against costs effectively. So in essence, the way that our company looks at supporting or not supporting new legislation is whether it's going to have a dramatic positive impact for public health versus the total cost borne by society, by tax. Whether it be through tax or through retail or so on. In the particular case of some of the proposed regulations, things like plain packaging have been proved not to reduce smoking significantly. In Australia, it's been a failed policy. In fact, the smoking rate has gone up on a year-over-year basis. And at the same time, it had a dramatic impact in terms of driving down the entire value of the chain from farmer through to retailer, because it destroys brand value. Brand value is part of the justification for charging slightly higher prices on this cigarette.
Yes, I mean, did you take the social economic impact into account here when formulating the bill? I mean, how do, for example, down the line, vendors be affected by something like this? How do small businesses who rely on the sale of cigarettes exist? Is there an alternative?
The socioeconomic impact assessment was conducted by University of Cape Town University, and eventually approved by the presidency, because they are the ones responsible for that. The key issue here is trying to strike a balance between that economic impact and the health impact, because it costs health a lot to try and treat people who are affected either by lungs cancer, who can't breathe, emphysema and whatever, due to tobacco products. So for us as health, if you are to balance that, we are saying there are other alternatives that people can sell. You don't have to rely on selling tobacco only to survive. There are a lot of things that people can sell. And we've seen with other products,
easier said than done, isn't it?
People do switch from one product to another, diversifying products.
They're going to be incentivized, though, surely.
That's something that needs to be discussed. How do we assist the small businesses to get into other, much more healthier products to sell? And that's a discussion that we are having with other government departments to see how best can this be addressed. But in terms of saying, let us save jobs and destroy health, it's a very difficult balance. And as health, we have to protect what we are protecting. I mean, we have to say...
It is a tough balance. It's a tough call. Sorry, can I just throw to this soundbite that I wanted to get a bit earlier? Francois van der Merwe, chair of the Tobacco Institute of Southern Africa, says the bill will have a negative impact on the economy. Let's get his comments on that one.
The display ban is completely impractical, where 80% of all cigarettes in our country are sold in the non-organized trade and the informal sector, many of them by roving vendors, by tabletops. How do you ban the display? There's no consultation. Even the socio-economic impact assessment says they haven't consulted with small businesses, and 30% of those people make their living from cigarettes.
Khaledi?
Yeah. So it's untrue to say that there wasn't any consultation. There was consultation. The socio-economic impact assessment, as we heard, has been done. And the people that sell cigarettes in the small business sector obviously don't only sell cigarettes, they sell other things as well. But when we're looking at the economy, we have to look at the income generating economy, as well as looking at the cost to the health system. So the last study that was done about the economic impact of tobacco on South Africa said that for every R1 we earn in excise taxes, we spend R2 on addressing health-related harm, which we collectively as taxpayers of South Africa are paying, and the tobacco industry is earning the profit.
You've really got to push, don't you, to kind of make it sink in.
Well, I mean, it's real.
Yeah.
And the tobacco industry is taking the profit, but we are paying for the health harm because the majority of people go to our public health system for treatment.
Okay, we've got a restaurateur from Cape Town, Savas, with a question. Go ahead. Hello, Savas. Can you hear us? Go ahead with your question, please. Okay, we've lost him. And another proposition under this bill is how you deal with smoking outside, whereas before it was allowed. It's not the way to go anymore. Also not smoking in the car with children. I mean, that makes sense, right?
So, I mean, I just think that we want to put it out there that the Vaping Products Association never said that the industry should not be regulated. There has to be regulation because we understand the role of the Department of Health in totality that they have to play on the topic. However, we are actually saying, for the moment, let us separate. Let's take the time to analyze the literature that is available so that we're actually able to say what is the best regulation that is suitable for our country.
But surely it's something that's going to stop you from smoking everything.
Well, I think the main thing that is there is that there is a product in the market that can actually assist in dealing with some of the challenges that the Department of Health is having, and that is the vaping product. And we have seen around the world, I keep on saying that because about last week, Thursday, we did have a conference in that we had Dr. Constellinus, who actually did an assessment of all the material that is available on vaping, to look at its harm, to look at what people have said at a global level. And out of that, one thing that they all agree with is that it is actually a safer product, 95% safer, if I might add, and that's actually what they're saying.
Okay, so
we have to consider things like that.
We've got Savas back, and I don't want to lose him again. Savas, go ahead.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening. What's your question, Savas?
Good evening. Yes, I'm calling from a restaurant chain in Western Cape. we've been allocated sections in our restaurants for smoking. Particularly, I'll ask the question to the Minister, and good evening, Minister. We've been spending millions and millions of rand on instruction from government to reduce size of smoking within our restaurants. They allocated us 25% smoking capacity for our restaurants and ordered us basically a number of years ago to put mechanical ventilation in to handle all the smoking facilities in the restaurants, which cost us on average of about 500 to 600,000 rand per restaurant. We comply to all of these laws, and we've done everything possible to accommodate this for the new amendments that were put into place. With the new legislations that you are proposing, what would happen to all our current restaurants and smoking sections within the eateries in the Western Cape or the whole of South Africa, and all this cash that has been spent on the government's insistence at the time?
Thanks, Thomas. Go ahead.
I need to talk about these 100% smoke-free areas. Obviously, when we made a decision of 25%, we didn't know the risks that would go with that. Now, over years, when you assess, you are actually putting the same employees who work in that 25% at risk of being exposed to secondary smoking.
Which is almost as dangerous, isn't it?
Yes, they have to serve people who sit in that area. The people who are sitting immediately just before you get to the smoke-free area, they inhale that smoke each time you open that door. So there is a risk with that as well. And even if they have this 25%, people will still use that corner if no one is smoking in it. It's not like you have to shut it down. So we are protecting employees who are working, we are protecting other customers who are non-smokers. Similarly, when you are smoking in your own house with a domestic worker who doesn't smoke, it's okay if you smoke alone and you have no domestic worker. Nobody will have issues with that. But exposing the poor domestic worker to your smoking, it's not fair. So it's something that...
So you've learned from mistakes in the past?
We've learned from mistakes in the past.
What hasn't worked?
Obviously, you can't have one regulation throughout your life. You always have to monitor, observe, and see whether that's working or not working. Tighten where you can, and this is exactly what we are doing.
And is it up to the government to do this? Are we at risk here of becoming a nanny state and being policed by the government?
And that's not something, as a member of the industry, I'm at liberty to decide. I think it has to be a public debate, and I think that's, as an industry representative, I have to say, yes, that's what we would really like to see, is a public debate. I think the question isn't about smoking in public places or protecting non-smokers. We would agree absolutely that non-smokers should have the right to breathe fresh air, and smokers have to respect those rights. That being said, this bill goes well beyond smoking in public places. It includes, for instance, if you drive a company car, that's a workplace, you're not allowed to smoke in it, regardless of whether there's ever another person in that car with you. Smoking in your home, as our representative from the Ministry of Health has pointed out. I don't know whether the general public in South Africa would be in agreement with saying that you should not be allowed to smoke in your own home. And finally, even if you go outside, so a taverner says to their clients, I'm sorry, you have to go smoke outside. Fine. Perhaps that can be justified in terms of protecting the health of the non-smokers. But the law goes beyond and says that even if you put a roof to protect them from the elements while they're standing outside smoking, that's against the law. It's an enclosed area. This has nothing to do with protecting health at that point. It's about ostracizing the smoker.
Okay, ostracizing the smoker possibly, and
denormalization.
Okay, and what about the crime factor? That's you become a criminal, don't you? I mean, you can be arrested. There's something like 55,000 young kids between the age of 10 and 15. I was quite shocked to find that are smoking. What happens to them if they are caught smoking? Do they go to jail? Do they pay a fine? I mean, how does that work?
So we've never had anyone charged because they're smoking somewhere they shouldn't smoke. The point about legislation like this, which is comprehensive and addresses different aspects of tobacco control to reduce consumption, is that it sends a signal about the harm that product will cause. That's the intention. So by saying to people, please don't smoke in your own home if there are other people there, it's for them to ask why, and to understand through programs like this how harmful it really is, equivalent to 30% what a smoker is exposed to, and understand that they shouldn't do it. And the research that we have over the last 24 years shows very clearly that smokers do not want to smoke, to expose other people to their smoke. They walk away because we have managed through our legislation to change the social norm. People know it's harmful, so they say, I'm taking the risk, I'm not going to put the risk on anybody else. So there's nothing draconian about it, there's nothing nanny state about it.
All right, we've got another caller, Lass from Johannesburg. Go ahead, Lass. Lass, can you hear me? Go ahead, please, if you can. All right. Who do you think does it well internationally? I mean, you look at France and the numbers are going down across the board, even for those considered disadvantaged where it's pretty prolific. Who would you view as a role model when it comes to tackling smoking successfully?
As much as the gentleman here is saying Australia is not doing well, I think they are. They are doing well with the regulations that they've put in place. Obviously, you can't have one aspect. You need to have a combination. There should be education, there should be a regulation. The idea is to create an environment, and where you are doing that, you can definitely drop smoking down. And it has happened, as I'm saying. Australia is one of those examples. And
they've got pretty
packaging.
They've really dealt with the packaging quite successfully, haven't they?
Yes, they have, and it's successful.
Yeah.
And maybe I need to just indicate something. The fear that people have that the bill will be regulating vaping exactly the same way as cigarette, the bill is creating an environment where we can regulate. How we regulate different aspects will be handled differently in different regulations. And those discussions are still going to be held with the public, with the various stakeholders. So this big fear, currently, our regulations did not enable us to regulate anything because this is a new product. Each time you try to close this gap, something new comes up. Each time you try, so the bill is just creating that environment so that we can identify how and what to regulate.
Catch up. We've got Lass back on the line, and then I will come to you afterwards. Go ahead, Lass.
Hello, good evening. I want to ask a question of the Department of Health lady. She says that smoking has increased lung cancer. I would like to know where she got her statistics because the cancer registry has only been going for 2 years. So I would like to know how she got her statistics.
You can get my contact so that we can give you the responses because we have the figures. Yes.
But you said decreased.
We have decreased. I said decreased.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Did you hear that, Lass? There's been a decrease.
A decrease, not an increase.
But I mean, the health impact is pretty well known, is it? I mean, how it changes your DNA, your genes. I mean, frightening for years and years, even after you've given up. Absolutely. You were going to say something.
I was just going to say that, I welcome the opportunity, as indicated, that we'll have, more time to engage on this bill because when one on the bill, yes.
Not the bill, the regulations that
or the regulation,
the bill.
that's fine. So as it stands currently, one of the things that is there, for example, it talks about, how do you communicate, how do you advertise. So coming from the vaping industry, it is still very new. We think that there has to be room within which we can communicate what is in the product, how do you use it, how do we make sure that it's actually safe. So with the legislation or the bill as currently proposed, we do not have a room to do that because all of a sudden it is lumped with the tobacco as we currently know it. And we're saying that as vaping, as opposed to saying later on in regulation, we will deal with it separately. If there's an opportunity to do that right away and say vaping, let's look at it holistically, what is available, that is something that we actually propose and would actually like, very much to engage the department on it.
And I'm sorry, we're going to have to wrap it up. Thank you very much, Andrew Newman, Len Moriwang-Mslangu, and Zodwa Velaman and Severa Kaladin. Thank you very much. But I think everyone's delighted that something is being done. Reports of sexual violence on campuses are increasing, so are South African tertiary institutions equipped to deal with some of the most heinous of crimes? That's what we examine up next. This is Tonight with Jane Dunn.